They never carried rifles, yet they fought one of the hardest battles of World War II. Their names were not written in the headlines, but their courage kept the world from collapsing. These were the women of the secret front, nurses, messengers, farmers, and factory workers, who held the line while the world was burning. In 1939, the war began to pull men to the front lines, and entire cities were left without their sons, fathers, and brothers. But where men left, women stepped forward. They drove trucks, repaired planes, and stood in factories where gunpowder and sweat filled the air. They were the invisible army and the hands behind victory. In London, while bombs fell, women filled the ambulance corps, guiding the wounded through streets on fire. They learned to keep calm when the air raid sirens screamed, carrying stretchers through smoke and rubble. In the Soviet Union, more than 1 million women joined the Red Army as snipers, pilots, and medics. The famous Night Witches, an all-female bomber regiment, flew wooden planes through darkness, cutting their engines to glide silently over enemy lines before dropping bombs and disappearing into the night sky. They had no armor, only bravery. In factories across Britain and America, women became known as Rosies, after the propaganda song, Rosie the Riveter. Their posters declared, "We can do it." They lifted steel, forged bullets, and built tanks, each bolt a message of defiance. Many worked 16-hour shifts with oil on their hands and fire in their hearts. The clanging of hammers became the rhythm of resistance. But beyond factories and uniforms, the quietest work was often the most dangerous. Women became couriers for the underground resistance, carrying secret messages hidden inside loaves of bread, bicycle frames, and even their clothing. In France, the Netherlands, and Poland, female spies risked everything. If caught, they faced torture or execution. Still, they kept moving, because to stop meant the truth would die with them. Governments around the world tried to hide their contributions at first. Official reports barely mentioned them. Yet without them, supply lines would have collapsed, hospitals would have gone silent, and entire operations would have failed. The truth is that the war could not have been won without those who never fired a single bullet. And when the nights grew long and the bombs fell closer, they held the world together in small ways. A warm meal in a shelter, a bandage on a soldier's wound, a letter sent to a mother waiting at home. It was courage wrapped in kindness, a different kind of heroism, one that didn't need a uniform to shine. This was the secret front, a war fought not on the battlefield, but in every home, every hospital, and every heart that refused to surrender. Their story was not told in medals or parades, but in survival itself. They called it the home front, but for millions of women, it was another battlefield. Their weapons were courage, compassion, and endurance. Every time they walked into a hospital, a factory, or a ruined street, they fought a different kind of war. In the hospitals of Europe and the Pacific, nurses faced horrors few could imagine. They worked beside soldiers under the echo of bombs, often with no anesthesia, no light, and no rest. Some performed surgeries in the dark, guided only by touch and instinct. Many of them died with their patients, refusing to abandon the wounded. They weren't just saving lives, they were holding humanity together. In Britain, women joined the Women's Land Army. They plowed fields, milked cows, and harvested crops while air raid sirens howled above them. They were farmers, mechanics, and mothers all at once, their hands blistered, their backs aching, their spirits unbroken. They fed the nation when the nation was starving. Meanwhile, in the offices of London and Washington, women worked behind typewriters and radios, decoding the messages that changed the war. At Bletchley Park, they cracked German codes transmitted through the Enigma machine. Without their work, the Allies might have lost entire fleets. These women never carried guns, but their minds were sharper than bullets. In occupied France, young women joined the resistance. They smuggled weapons under loaves of bread, rode bicycles across enemy checkpoints, and carried maps written in invisible ink. They learned to smile while lying to soldiers at roadblocks, knowing one mistake could mean death. Yet they rode anyway because they believed in freedom. When the war finally ended in 1945, the world cheered the soldiers, but many of these women went home in silence. Their service records were buried, their names forgotten. They returned to kitchens and offices, as if the world wanted to pretend they had never stood in its defense. But history remembers, even when headlines don't. Their courage lived in every life they saved, every family they fed, every code they broke. They were the quiet strength behind victory. the heart of a world that refused to die. The story of war is not just the story of men in trenches. It's also the story of women in silence, the ones who fought without weapons and won without glory. Her weapon was not a gun. It was a typewriter. In the shadowed offices of London, beneath the constant hum of decoding machines, sat women whose names would never make the newspapers. Their mission was silent but deadly, to outthink an empire built on fear. They didn't fight with bullets. They fought with intelligence. In 1939, the Allies were desperate to break the German enigma. Code, a system, so complex it changed every day, producing billions of combinations. Thousands had tried and failed. But inside a quiet mansion called Bletchley Park, a group of young women began to change history. One of them was a clerk, another a linguist, another a former teacher. Many were recruited straight from universities because they were good at puzzles, chess, or languages. Most of them were under 25. They sat for endless hours before typewriters, copying messages of strange letters and numbers, turning chaos into pattern. Each keystroke was a battle. Each page of code could mean hundreds of lives. They worked in secrecy. No one outside the walls could know what they were doing. Not even their families. They were told, never talk, not even after the war. And they didn't. Among them was a young woman named Jane, known only by her initials in the archives. She spoke German fluently and could memorize entire messages at a glance. For hours, she typed intercepted signals from the Luftwaffe, German Air Force, communications, and searched for repeated patterns. One afternoon, she noticed a phrase that appeared again and again. Highlight, it looked meaningless. But it wasn't. It was the key that unlocked a chain of transmissions revealing the position of a German submarine fleet. Her discovery saved an entire convoy of Allied ships, but she never received a medal. No one outside Bletchley Park even knew her name. While others heard bombs falling, she heard the rhythm of keys clicking, the heartbeat of a hidden war. Every mistake could cost lives. Every correct keystroke could change the course of history. Across occupied Europe, other women fought the same war, but with even higher stakes. They weren't behind desks. They were behind enemy lines. Women of the resistance carried radios, coded messages, and microfilm inside handbags, lipstick tubes, or even loaves of bread. They worked under fake names and false papers. They smiled at soldiers who would shoot them if they knew the truth. To the enemy, they were invisible. To history, they became legends. In the summer of 1943, a message arrived at Bletchley Park that changed everything. The Nazis had developed a new encryption method, even harder to break. Panic spread through the decoding rooms. For weeks, messages went unread. Allied ships began to sink again. The invisible war was slipping away. But it was another woman, a mathematician named Joan, who found the weakness, working late into the night. She realized that German operators often repeated phrases out of habit, like signing their names or ending messages with Heil Hitler. Those repetitions became the threads that broke the code. Her discovery helped Alan Turing and his team rebuild the machine that finally cracked Enigma. Yet for decades, her name was never mentioned. She was classified, erased from the story she helped to write. Meanwhile, across France, a young courier named Madeleine carried a radio strapped to her back, disguised as a bicycle repair kit. She transmitted coded messages from the countryside to London, often while German patrols searched the fields. She once said, "If they catch me, I'll be gone by morning. But if they don't, I'll send another message." She sent over 100 before she was caught. Her signals had helped the Allies plan the D-Day invasion. She was executed weeks before the liberation of Paris. There were hundreds like her, spies, couriers, saboteurs, each risking everything so that someone else could live. Some were captured and tortured, others vanished without a trace. But every time a coded message reached its destination, their courage lived on. When the war finally ended, the walls of Bletchley Park fell silent. The typewriters stopped. The papers were burned. The women went home without recognition, forbidden to ever speak about what they had done. It would take almost 50 years before their secrets were finally declassified. Today, historians call them the invisible soldiers. But they weren't invisible at all. They were the pulse of intelligence, the quiet heartbeat behind victory. The war may have ended with explosions, but it was won with whispers and the steady rhythm of keys in a room full of women who refused to give up. They didn't wear medals or march in parades. They left behind no monuments, no fame. But every time you hear the sound of freedom, remember this: somewhere a woman typed it into existence, They say an army marches on its stomach, and during World War II, that truth became literal. Food was no longer just nourishment. It was strategy, survival, and power. Every loaf of bread, every drop of milk, every grain of rice became part of the war itself. When the war erupted in 1939, nations quickly realized that feeding millions of soldiers and civilians would be one of the greatest challenges of the century. Farms were destroyed, ports were blocked, and cities starved. Yet, behind the chaos, food quietly became one of the most powerful weapons of all. In Britain, rationing began early. Each family received a small book filled with stamps that decided what they could eat. Meat, eggs, sugar, and butter were limited. But creativity wasn't. Housewives learned to stretch meals with whatever they had. Breadcrumbs instead of flour, carrots instead of sugar. The Ministry of Food broadcast weekly radio. Lessons teaching citizens to make something from nothing. Make do and mend wasn't just a slogan, it was survival. Across the ocean, America used food as propaganda. Posters read, "Food fights for freedom and grow your own, can your own." Victory gardens appeared everywhere, front yards, rooftops, and school playgrounds. By 1944, more than 20 million gardens produced nearly half of all vegetables eaten in the U.S. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was a national movement. But in occupied Europe, food became a weapon of control. The Nazis used hunger to dominate entire nations. In Poland, France, and the Netherlands, food rations were cut to starvation levels. People risked their lives trading on the black market, bartering jewelry for bread or sugar. The lucky ones had farms. The others learned to eat weeds, acorns, and anything that could fill the stomach for another day. In the Soviet Union, famine swept across cities under siege. During the Battle of Leningrad, people ate wallpaper paste, shoe leather, even sawdust mixed with flour. Yet the city refused to surrender. The sound of hunger became the rhythm of endurance. Every nation learned that food could win or lose a war. Soldiers could not fight without it. Civilians could not survive without it. And leaders quickly realized that whoever controlled the fields controlled the future. On the front lines, soldiers lived from tins and ration boxes. In the U.S. Army, the sea ration became their daily meal. Canned meat, biscuits, powdered coffee, and a small piece of chocolate. It wasn't gourmet, but it was fuel. In Britain, troops lived on compo packs filled with corned beef, tea jam, and condensed milk. The German army carried iron rations, designed to last weeks but tasting like metal and desperation. Behind every bite was an army of invisible workers, mostly women, packing, canning, and cooking for soldiers they would never meet. In factories, they stirred vats of soup, sealed tins, and wrapped chocolate bars, each one a small token of home. They didn't wear uniforms, but they were part of the war machine. Every meal sent to the front was a message. You are not forgotten. In the U.S., entire convoys carried food across the Atlantic through deadly waters. German submarines hunted them, knowing that sinking one ship of supplies could starve thousands. The Battle of the Atlantic wasn't just about oil or weapons, it was about bread. When ships arrived safely, soldiers called them lifeboats of hope. Meanwhile, in Asia, Japan struggled with its own food crisis. Rice became scarce, and substitutions like barley and millet became daily staples. Civilians were told it was patriotic to eat less, to sacrifice for the emperor. But hunger doesn't follow orders. As supplies ran out, even loyalty began to weaken. When the war finally ended, the scars of hunger remained long after the bombs stopped falling. Food had decided battles, shaped alliances, and broken empires. It had become a weapon more powerful than bullets, because it attacked the will to fight, not the body alone. For those who lived through it, food would never again be just food. It was memory. It was life. It was proof that the smallest things, a loaf of bread, a garden, a can of beans, could change the course of history. Not every hero made it home. Some never even had a grave. They were the women whose voices were lost in the noise of victory. Nurses, couriers, and volunteers who vanished into the chaos of war. Their faces faded from photographs, their names from memory. But history still whispers their stories. In 1940, when the war was reaching its darkest years, thousands of women left behind everything, their homes, families, and safety, to serve. They joined the Red Cross, the Women's Auxiliary, and the Resistance, answering a call that promised danger but offered purpose. Many never returned. On the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific, military nurses lived in tents near the front lines. Their hospital beds were made from wooden crates. their operating rooms from blood-soaked canvas. They worked without sleep, stitching wounds while bombs shook the earth beneath them. When the front shifted, they packed their kits and followed the men, closer to danger each time. Some were captured, some were killed, and some simply vanished. One nurse, Lieutenant Evelyn Marshall, was last seen in 1944, helping the wounded after a German air raid in Italy. Her field hospital was destroyed that night. No one ever found her. Decades later, villagers still placed wildflowers near the ruins every spring. To them, she was the woman who stayed behind to save strangers. In occupied France, resistance couriers carried messages through forests and cities, crawling with German patrols. A young courier named Helene rode her bicycle through enemy lines to deliver codes that would help the Allies during D-Day. She was only 21 when she was captured. Her last letter read, "If I do not return, tell my mother that I was not afraid." She never returned. For every story that was recorded, hundreds more were lost. Burned papers, missing files, forgotten voices. The war ended, but silence kept many of their names buried. After the victory celebrations faded, the families of those missing were left with questions instead of closure. Some waited months, some waited a lifetime. Mothers sat by the radio every evening, hoping to hear their daughters' names read among the rescued. Letters came, but most only said, "We regret to inform you." In Asia, the stories were no less tragic. Japanese nurses, called angels of the battlefield, died in secret missions while treating wounded. Soldiers in the Philippines and Burma, many of their bodies were never recovered. Their names were recorded only in small journals found beside empty beds, diaries of courage written in fading ink. In Poland and Russia, women who worked as partisans disappeared into the forests. Some fought to the end, some were captured and executed. Others vanished into prison camps, their records erased by time. They became ghosts of war, unknown, unseen, but not forgotten. Years later, historians began to uncover what governments had hidden for decades. In military archives and forgotten letters, they found traces, photos with handwritten notes, medals never claimed, service numbers that led to no grave. Piece by piece, the women who had vanished began to return to history. Each story uncovered was a resurrection. Each name rediscovered, a heartbeat restored. They may not have come home in body, but through memory, they live again. These were not nameless soldiers, but they were daughters, wives, and friends. They faced darkness with nothing but faith and a heartbeat. And though history tried to silence them, their courage still echoes through every nurse who saves a life, every woman who stands her ground, every person who dares to serve others without recognition. They are the voices in the shadows, the women who never came home, but never truly left us.